His radio was dead. An entire German company was moving through the wheat field directly toward an undefended gap in the British line. He had 50 rounds and 20 seconds to decide. How did one man with a single rifle get to this point? We'll tell you exactly how it happened. Early morning, June 12, 1944, just outside Cambs-en-Plaine. Something moved in the wheat. He saw it for less than a second. A German helmet catching the gray pre-dawn light before dropping back into the green. Lance Corporal Duncan McLaren of the 1st Battalion, Black Watch, pressed his cheek tighter against the wooden stock of his No. 4 Lee Enfield and held his breath. He didn't fire, not yet, because where there was one helmet, there were dozens more crouched behind it, and firing too early would give away the only advantage he had, the fact that they didn't know he was there. The Black Watch had come ashore from Sword Beach 6 days earlier. 6 days of hedgerow fighting, mortar fire, roads clogged with burning vehicles and dead horses, sleep measured in 20-minute intervals. By June 12th, the battalion was dug into the northern outskirts of Cambs-en-Plaine, a small Norman village that had been reduced to broken walls and blackened beams. Their job was straightforward in concept and brutal in practice. Hold the northern line while British armor reorganized south of Caen. Don't give ground. Don't let anything through. McLaren's position was the upper floor of a partly demolished farmhouse sitting at the northern edge of the village. The structure had taken artillery damage sometime in the first 48 hours. Half the roof was gone. The eastern wall had partially collapsed, and the floor was covered in broken tile and plaster dust. But the north-facing wall was still standing, and it gave him exactly what he needed. A field of view stretching roughly 300 yards across open farmland, with a sunken road running east to west at the far edge. The Germans had been using that sunken road as a covered approach route since the night of the 11th. McLaren had been watching it since 0400. He counted the disturbance points in the wheat, not one, not two. 4 separate areas of movement, spread across a front of nearly 80 yards. He knew what that meant. That was a company deployment, infantry advancing in dispersed formation, using the chest-high wheat as concealment, pushing northeast directly toward the gap between his position and C Company's left flank, which sat 600 yards to the east. Somewhere between 80 and 120 men moving steadily through that field, and as far as McLaren could tell in that moment, he was the only British soldier with eyes on them. His radio had gone dead at 0430. He'd reported it. A runner had been sent to battalion. The runner hadn't come back. There was no way to call artillery, no way to alert C Company in time for them to refuse their flank. What McLaren had was his rifle, a bandolier of 50 rounds draped across his chest, and about 20 seconds to make a decision. He could withdraw. Get down off this floor right now, move through the rubble south of the farmhouse, find a working radio and hand the problem to someone with more options. That was the rational choice. That was probably the correct tactical choice by the manual. But the manual hadn't accounted for this specific gap, this specific field, this specific company moving through it right now. If they reached the open ground between the farmhouse cluster and C Company's flank before anyone knew they were coming, they would be inside the British line before a single Bren gun could be repositioned to face them. The attack on Cambs-en-Plaine the previous day had nearly broken through on the first attempt. A second attempt from the flank in morning mist, against men who couldn't see it coming. That would be a different outcome entirely. McLaren settled the crosshairs on the forward edge of the nearest disturbance. He found a shape in the wheat. He fired. The Lee Enfield's crack split the morning open like a thunderclap. The shape in the wheat dropped and didn't move. For 4 full seconds, the entire field went absolutely still. That suspended moment where every man in that wheat simultaneously understood that something had changed and none of them yet knew what or where. Then it broke. Men going flat into the wheat, men scrambling sideways to new positions, German voices cutting back and forth across the field with urgent, clipped instructions. McLaren was already working the bolt, Already moving the muzzle left to find the next shape, a soldier pushing to his feet to sprint to better cover, and fired a second time. The man dropped mid-stride. McLaren shifted right without lifting his cheek from the stock, found a third figure crouched and turning, fired, cycled the bolt in one continuous motion and kept scanning. 3 men down in under 12 seconds. And the German advance had stopped. Not broken, stopped. There's a difference. 3 casualties from a company of 80 or more doesn't break anything. But a sniper in an unknown position, firing with calm and precision, produces a very specific tactical paralysis. The men in that wheat field couldn't see where the fire was coming from. Every time someone moved with purpose, someone fell. The company commander, somewhere in that field, now had a problem he hadn't planned for. Before he could push his advance forward again, he needed to know where the shooter was. He needed to locate the threat, fix it, and neutralize it. Until he did that, pushing forward meant feeding men into fire he couldn't direct his own soldiers against. He stopped his company, started giving orders. McLaren could hear the shift in the German movement, less forward, more lateral. They were spreading out, trying to find an angle. That bought time. McLaren estimated 10 minutes, maybe 12 if he was lucky. He moved immediately, sliding 3 feet left along the floor, staying below the window line, repositioning before anyone below had time to triangulate the muzzle flash. He rose slowly at the new position, found the edge of the window frame, and looked out. 2 men were working along the stone wall to his left, moving in bounds. One covering, one advancing, then switching. A veteran pair. Moving to get eyes on the farmhouse from a flanking angle, trying to identify the exact room, the exact window, the exact position. McLaren watched them until they reached 90 yards. At 90 yards, there was no margin for error and no possibility of a miss. He put the first man down with a single round. The second man dropped behind the wall and stayed there. 8 minutes since the first shot, position still undisclosed. He listened to the field. The movement pattern had changed again, and not in the way he'd hoped. The disturbances in the wheat were no longer pressing northeast. They were spreading south and east, arcing outward in a wide curve. McLaren understood what he was looking at immediately. The company had split. The larger element, he estimated 55 to 65 men based on the width of the movement, was arcing south to bypass the farmhouse entirely and push directly onto the British flank. That was the real attack. That had always been the real attack. The smaller detachment, perhaps 20 men, had been given one job: fix the sniper, neutralize the position, make it safe for the main body to move. He looked east. The drainage ditch that ran parallel to the road, 220 yards out, was moving. Not with water. With men, pushing north along the ditch line toward a firing angle that would let them suppress the farmhouse windows directly. He measured the geometry. 4 minutes, maybe 5, before they reached a position where they could put sustained fire through every window on the north face of that building simultaneously. After that, the farmhouse was done, and the main body of 60-plus Germans would be moving freely with nothing between them and C Company's left flank. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know that this is the moment where the real decision gets made. Not the first shot. Any soldier can fire a first shot. The real decision is what you do when the plan starts collapsing around you and you're doing the arithmetic alone. McLaren went back to the north window. He fired 4 rounds into the southern arc of the main German movement, not aimed at specific targets but at the mass, deliberately shifting his point of aim between each shot, firing fast enough that it sounded like more than one rifle. Then he dropped flat, crawled across the broken floor on his elbows, and got to the east-facing gap in the wall, a narrow opening where the stonework had crumbled, and looked out toward the drainage ditch. The flanking detachment had paused. The burst of fire from the farmhouse, 4 rounds from what sounded like 2 different positions on 2 different sides of the building, had created a problem for the German officer in that ditch. He couldn't be certain he was facing a lone sniper. The fire pattern suggested at minimum a section, possibly more, with good coverage in multiple directions. Pressing forward into that, without mortar support confirmed, was a commitment he wasn't ready to make without more information. McLaren had bought himself 90 more seconds. He used them. He found a head rising carefully above the northern edge of the ditch, a soldier trying to get a visual on the farmhouse, and took the shot at 215 yards. The head dropped. The ditch went completely still. 90 seconds after that, he heard it. British voices, low and fast, coming from the rubble line 30 yards south of the farmhouse. A runner, pressed flat behind a broken wall section, breathing hard. Then a sergeant's voice, controlled and direct. McLaren, 2 Bren teams coming up from C Company. On your right, 150 yards. Hold 1 more minute.
1 minute.
He went back to the north window for the last time and fired 3 rounds into the southern arc of the main German movement. Spaced this time, deliberate, each shot aimed carefully at a specific disturbance. He hit at least 1 man, possibly 2. The arcing movement slowed noticeably, the company commander pulling his men down again, trying to understand why the volume of fire from the farmhouse wasn't decreasing, why the position hadn't been fixed by his flanking detachment, why his mortar support still hadn't been confirmed. The Bren guns opened at 07:08. 2 guns, set 150 yards to the southeast, cutting across the drainage ditch from a flanking angle the German detachment in it had no cover against. The fire was controlled and precise. The detachment broke within 40 seconds. Some men scrambling back the way they'd come, others going flat in the ditch mud and staying there. The threat to the farmhouse collapsed in less than a minute. The main German company heard all of it. They heard the Bren guns open from an unexpected direction, heard the volume and control of the fire, and understood that the British defensive position was far deeper and more organized than anything they'd calculated. Their flanking detachment had failed. Their frontal advance had been stopped and restarted 4 times by precision rifle fire from a position they still hadn't precisely located. Mortar support hadn't materialized. The company commander made the decision that comes when the plan has fully unraveled. He pulled his men back to the sunken road. They did not attempt the advance again that morning. McLaren came down from the upper floor at 07:12, 31 minutes in that room, 23 rounds fired. He sat against the base of the stairwell wall in the farmhouse ground floor and finished the last of his water without saying anything. The post-action assessment completed the following day put the German company's delay at a minimum of 35 minutes. In isolation, 35 minutes sounds like a footnote. Inside the context of what was actually happening on that section of the line on June 12, 1944, those 35 minutes produced 3 specific outcomes that mattered. The 2 Bren teams from C Company reached their intercept position and were able to destroy the flanking detachment in the ditch. A partial artillery registration was logged and confirmed on the sunken road approach route, giving the battery a fire mission they used twice in the following 48 hours. And the gap between the farmhouse cluster and C Company's left flank was formally identified by the battalion commander and flagged for reinforcement. Work that closed a vulnerability that had existed unaddressed since the battalion's initial deployment to the northern edge of the village. All 3 of those outcomes required those 35 minutes. Without them, the German company reaches C Company's flank sometime around 06:40, before the Bren teams have moved, before anyone has formally identified the gap, before artillery has a fire mission registered on the approach. C Company, already depleted after 6 days of continuous fighting and running below strength in every section, gets hit on their open left flank by 60-plus men they didn't see coming. That conversation ends badly. For a lot of people. The fighting at Camden Plain ground on for another full week. The 1st Black Watch bled significantly in that period. Officers killed in clusters, sections reduced to 4 and 5 men, the grinding attrition of holding Normandy ground against an enemy who knew the terrain and wasn't done fighting for it. McLaren remained in position through those days, working from whatever vantage point the crumbling village offered, doing the invisible work that snipers do in that kind of sustained defensive fighting. He was wounded in August during the Falaise fighting. A mortar round that landed close enough shrapnel catching him in the shoulder and left arm while he was moving between positions during a fire mission. The wounds were serious enough to pull him from the line. He recovered at a field hospital, returned to the battalion in September, and fought through to the end of the war. He came home to Scotland in 1945, went back to the ordinary life that men from ordinary places go back to after extraordinary things, and by most accounts said very little about any of it for the rest of his life. He was never decorated for June 12th. No citation was written, no commendation moved up the chain. A single line in the battalion war diary recorded that a sniper had delayed a German flanking movement near the northern farmhouse cluster east of Combat-en-Plaine. That was the official record of 31 minutes, 23 rounds, and a decision made alone in a broken room with a dead radio. The line read, as matter of fact as a weather report, and was filed alongside hundreds of other matter-of-fact lines describing things that had cost men everything. That's how most of it actually worked. The actions that held lines intact, that bought the minutes other soldiers needed to move, needed to position, needed to survive, happened without audiences and without guarantees. The ones that got formally recognized were the ones where a witnessing officer survived to write the citation, where the chain of cause and effect was visible and clean enough to put on paper. The ones that didn't get written up were just as real. In many cases, they were more consequential, precisely because they happened early enough to prevent the kind of crisis that produces heroism citations in the first place. McLaren didn't hold a German company in place because he was fearless or because he was seeking recognition. He held them in place because in the space of about 20 seconds, standing in a ruined farmhouse in the Norman countryside at 06:37 in the morning, he did the arithmetic and reached a conclusion. Pulling back meant something worse happened to the men of C Company. So he didn't pull back. He fired his first round, and then his second, and then kept doing it until someone else arrived to make it mean something permanent. The men of C Company never fully knew what had happened 600 yards to their northwest, while the mist was still sitting on the fields. They knew their left flank had stayed quiet that morning. They knew the expected German pressure hadn't materialized the way the previous days had. They moved out that afternoon toward their next objective, carrying their wounded, short on sleep and ammunition and almost everything else, not knowing about the 23 rounds or the 31 minutes, or the man in the farmhouse who had done the arithmetic and stayed. Some of those men made it home, some didn't. None of them ever knew the specific shape of what had protected them that morning. That's the thing about the small actions that hold the larger ones together. They don't announce themselves. They just quietly determine what's possible. And then they get filed in a war diary in a single sentence, and the men who benefited from them never know to look for the name. McLaren knew. He carried that knowledge home to Scotland, and whatever it meant to him in the years that followed, the quiet certainty that on one particular morning in Normandy, he had been in exactly the right place and made exactly the right call, that had to be sufficient. For most of them, it was. It had to be. The wheat field outside Combat-en-Plaine looks peaceful now, flat Norman farmland. No broken walls, no drainage ditches full of men trying to decide whether to move. Just fields and ski and the kind of silence that only exists because of what once happened inside it.